Hello, we continue considering intrapsychic domain in personality psychology. And in previous lecture, we discussed classical psychoanalysis of Sigmund Freud and its contributions and criticisms, and the theory from ego psychology and neo-Freudian school, the theory of Erik Erikson. In this video, we continue with considering and analyzing the theories of Karen Horney and Erik Erikson as a prominent neo-Freudian psychologists. And then we will transit to contemporary psychoanalysis and attachment theory. So let's start with discussing Karen Horney personality and personal history. She was born in Germany and lived in the United States, so she had quite an interesting journey, both personally and professionally. One of her famous quotes, a normal human being does not exist. An interesting idea from a psychotherapist and psychoanalyst. So her parents were Scandinavian Protestants who moved to Germany. She wanted to be a doctor, even in the times when women were not allowed to attend universities. And actually, an interesting fact about Karen Horney's biography, she was one of the first feminists, and she is very famous for her ideas and activities in this area, trying to bring more social justice. So she received medical doctor degree eventually, so she was very determined at the age of 28. Started her own psychoanalysis in the period of her life when she gave birth to her first child and lost both of her parents. So it was really a turning point in her biography when both of her parents died and she gave birth to her first child. And everything started to change, so she started her own journey in psychoanalysis back then. She moved in the United States after divorce with her husband in 1932, right at the end of the Great Depression, and she settled there alone with 3 daughters without any support. So Karen Horney had a really, really strong personality. She was super determined, and she got through, actually. So she even founded Association of Advancements of Psychoanalysis, an American journal of psychoanalysis in the United States, and became quite a successful immigrant. So, as I already mentioned, she's one of the first feminists in psychology, and unfortunately died from cancer. So she lived. She could live much more and write more interesting books. But her legacy still is very interesting and vast and rich. So let's consider some of her ideas which benefit personality psychology. So Horney was not happy with some of the Freud concepts. Not surprisingly, one of the most controversial concepts of Freud's originalist theory is the notion of penis and why. So Freud supposed that all women want to have a penis, and they invite. So this claim was not supported by Karen Horney, not surprisingly. So she supposed that it's nonsensical and just caused by social injustice. So women want the same social power as men have, not their penis. So penis here can be just as a symbol of patriarchy and social injustice of the society where men have much more power and privilege compared to women. So we just need to change our social practices according to Karen Horney. And in this sense, we're moving into the right direction, so we didn't achieve as much as we wanted in this area of our social interaction. So Karen Horney also underlines that culture might contain different standards for males and females, such that, for example, girls should be ashamed of promiscuous sex when boys are experiencing feeling proud because of that. And it's one of the examples of this, she calls this double standard. And since then it became words from our common language. So, but double standard as a concept was coined by Karen Horney. Nowadays, people more and more discuss those double standards and try to do something with them. But 100 years ago, so it was a completely revolutionary concept introduced by Karen Horney, which we are grateful for. So Corin also coins the phrase fear of success to highlight gender difference in response to competition in achievement situations. So again, Karen Horney worked and lived in the first half of 20th century. And society was very different from what we have right now in terms of social relationships. It was a time of huge gender disparity where women were not allowed to get education. They were not promoted on many job places. They were only expected to have family and raise children and be housewives, especially in the United States. So Horney observed a tendency of some women were afraid to succeed too much because men responded on successful women with a lot of anger and frustration. So women should be like successful to complete their job duties, but not too successful to avoid harming their male colleagues' self-esteem. And it was really unfair, and many women experienced significant fear and anxiety they were afraid to be overachievers compared to men, and that's why Horney coins the phrase fear of success. So Horney stressed the point that, yes, biology determines biological sex, but cultural norms also important, and they determine what is acceptable in terms of social rules. And because of Horney, we actually use the concept of masculinity and femininity, because she was one of the first psychologists who even used those concepts in psychology. So her works on gender differences and the idea that sex and gender are not the same were very revolutionary for its time. And since then, actually, we use this as a common knowledge. Yes, gender as a set of social ideas very different from your biological sex. And of course, it's not the same. But back then, most of people didn't reflect the difference, and Karen Horney underlines this and brought professionals' attention to that, which was very important. So she published a book, Feminine Psychology. So unfortunately, this book was published almost 15 years after her death. So, and it contained completely revolutionary ideas on gender studies of its time. So I also advise you to read this book. It would be very interesting for you to compare with modern gender studies and understanding of social problems, social justice, patriarchy, and gender. Actually, very interesting to compare. So I advise you to read this for sure. So another famous book of Karen Horney is The Neurotic Personality of Our Time, one of her classical works, also worth reading. So she wrote it very long ago in 1937. Many points from this book actually sound quite modern. So she believes that neurosis, this is a concept of classical psychoanalysis, results from basic anxiety and is caused by interpersonal relationships. So as many neo-Freudian psychologists, Karen Horney supposes social factors are much more important than Freud supposed, and the idea that our neurotic symptoms and anxiety come from social interactions with our parents, friends, school teachers, and other forms of interpersonal relationships. And we need to investigate those relationships to understand the root of all problems our clients possibly have. So she supposed that some people who suffer from those neurotic symptoms or just neurotics has the same needs as other people. So they have completely the same needs. The problem is that those needs are exaggerated, hypertrophied, and might become rigid. So people just want something, they hyper-focused on that. They want much more than an average person, and the ways how they can satisfy those needs is very rigid. So only a certain way is accepted. Because of that, because they're like hypertrophied and rigid, those people experience significant problems in interpersonal relationships. So Horney suppose that neurotic needs can be classified into three broad categories. Needs that move people toward others. So such neurotic needs cause individuals to seek additional affirmation and acceptance from others. People with these needs are often described as needy or clingy, and they seek out approval and love. So they constantly need some approval, acceptance, praise. Nowadays, I would say that those people need likes and comments, constant likes and comments on social networks. They want to feel connection with others, which is completely normal need, but when it becomes exaggerated, like too much, it's already not great for your well-being and well-being of other people around you. So the second group of needs that move people away from others. Such neurotic needs create hostility and antisocial behavior. These individuals often described as cold, indifferent, and aloof. So they don't want to communicate with other people. They want more freedom and autonomy as a regular person, and the need of autonomy and freedom and just to stay alone sometimes, again, is completely normal, but when it becomes like too much, it creates problems. And the third one, needs that move people against others. Such neurotic needs result in hostility and control over other people. So such individuals start to abuse other people, and they can be domineering, unkind, and like completely hostile. So again, we want to have control over other people and influence their decision and feel important. It's also normal at some extent. The problem is when it becomes too much, right? So those three groups of needs, each group includes several needs according to current Horney. So if one type of need just kind of stuck, right? So you have certain type of neurotic personality. So coping strategies, which we use to satisfy those needs, can create three types of personality. Aggressive, such people assume that everyone is an enemy and only look out for themselves, so they're very self-centered. Compliant, such people very sensitive, need other people and spontaneously work to meet other people's expectations, but sometimes they forget about themselves. All right, so they like too compliant. And detached, people who want to be self-sufficient, don't communicate with others, create emotional distance, and they just want to pretend they live alone without the society. So out the point of alienation, they don't get other people too close. So what are the needs which Karen Horney described? So she described quite many needs. So the need for affection and approval, right? So the naming is unfortunately self-explanatory. So people want to be liked. They want to get along with other people and that other people will evaluate them highly. The need for a partner. So more people experience a need to have a romantic partner. And again, if it's too much, people fear to be abandoned too much, and exaggerate importance of love, right? Love is important. Romantic relationships are important, but we have other things to do in our life. So exaggerating this too much and create a whole universe based on romantic relationships can bring a lot of trouble, even in those romantic relationships, not even talking about the other parts of the life. So the need to restrict one's life. So people want just to be almost invisible. They avoid wishing for material things. They make all needs secondary and underevaluate their talents and abilities. So just, I'm not here. I'm not too important. I can sacrifice everything, right? To some extent, being able to sacrifice your needs to help others and to think about others is good, but if it's too much, you just neglect yourself, which leads to significant psychological problems. The need for power, again, normal need, considered to be universal type of need, even in other theories. People want to have power and leverage and decide what other people will do, higher social status. So, but when, again, it's too much, when it becomes a neurotic need, people start to praise strengths, despise weakness, want to dominate other people, fear any possible limitations, helplessness, or uncontrollable situation where they lack power. And it's, again, such situations are a normal part of our life. You not always control everything. You not always feel a lot of agency and power over other people. It's normal. But if this need for power is get to this neurotic level, it creates problems. So, and fifth, the need to exploit others, right? We want other people to do something for us. But again, sometimes it's okay to some extent, right? We want other people to do something. Some people get this exaggerated, so they try to manipulate others, abuse them, forced to do something they don't want to. The need for prestige, it's about public recognition, acclaim, and high social status, including material possessions and signs of high social status and well-being, for example, very expensive car, very expensive house, or something. So the problem, such people also very afraid of any type of social status loss, like embarrassment or acting clumsy and not looking so prestigious in public. The seventh, need for personal admiration. People with this need act very narcissistic, exaggerated self-perception, wanted to be admired, absolutely admired by other people, care only about themselves. Not good if it's too much. Need for personal achievement. Again, the need for achievement in general is like good motivation. Some of us have more than of that, some less, but some people can be over-focused on achievements and too afraid of any type of failure, and it becomes a problem. The need for independence, it's about being self-sufficient, ability to rely on yourself. Again, a good thing. When it's too much, a person becomes like a lonely wolf, relying only on themselves, not trusting other people, unable to get any help, even if other people offer it, trying to be too self-reliant, also not great because it leads to some sort of voluntary social isolation. And the final, the need for perfection. We, time after time, want to make something perfect, which again is okay, but too much, right? So people can get obsessed with doing something perfectly, and perfectionism is a not positive thing for your well-being and mental health. So Karen Horney described all those needs and the importance of social factors, gender, and sex difference, and contributed significantly into Neo-Freudian school in terms of developing these views on motivation, needs, social relationships. And the third prominent figure inside this neurofluid and ego psychology movement is Erik Erikson. You probably already know a bit if you studied psychology before about Erik Erikson in his periodization of development, but let's discuss his biography first. So one of his famous quotes, "The more you know yourself, the more patience you have for what you see in others." It's actually, those words have a lot of wisdom in them, so think about that a bit. Erik was born in quite a problematic situation. So his mother cheated on her husband and conceived Erik with another male. 100 years ago, it was a dangerous situation for a woman. So she just fled her house and moved to another city to avoid any possible problems with her husband. And actually, Erik never knew who was his real biological father. And it created some problems in his life. And that's why he was often thinking and even introduced the concept of identity in psychology. He invented his name, so his real last name is not Erikson. Initially, his last name was Solomonsen, and then his mother married for the second time for a person with a last name Homburger, which was like a neutral German last name. But when he moved to United States, this last name sounds funny because of association with the food item hamburger, and he chose to have Erikson as his last name. He actually didn't have a university degree. An interesting fact about one of the key psychologists of all time, he never got a university degree in anything, in psychology in particular. Actually, he was working as a wandering artist and tutor for children. He taught them how to draw. So he traveled across the Europe with different fairies, performed in different carnivals. And later he started to teach children how to draw. And that's how he met Anna Freud, the daughter of Sigmund Freud. So he started to teach children of psychoanalytics how to draw. And Anna Freud noted his work and decided that he is a very talented person. And he tried to speak with him and promoted the idea of studying psychoanalysis. Anna Freud was a very famous psychoanalyst herself, following her father's steps. So Erikson got interested in psychoanalysis, but he was forced to flee Nazi Germany as well. Initially, he wanted to move to Denmark, but it didn't work, and he eventually immigrated to the United States. Erikson there met Canadian-born dancer and artist Joan Erikson in 1930, and they remained together until the rest of their life. So he was just married only once. And he's considered to be the 12th most eminent psychologist of 20th century, right? Without university degree. Actually, he worked at Harvard University. Imagine nowadays a person without university degree coming and teaching at Harvard University. So probably Erikson was quite an eloquent, silver-tongued person. So what were his ideas? Erikson believed, as Fromm and Horney, that ego as a structure has greater importance than Freud initially supposed. And he supposed that a psychoanalyst should study ego instead of id. So he also was agreed that psychosocial factors are much more important than biological factors in terms of how they influence our life and personality. And Erikson also based his theory on what he called the epigenetic principle. it's a notion that we develop through predetermined stages of development, but how we resolve each state conflict is not predetermined. So the stages themselves are predetermined, but how you progress through those stages is completely individual. It's so-called epigenetic principle. So one of his famous writings is the book Identity, Use, and Crisis, about identity and what is to be a teenager and how people try to understand who they are. Actually, a classical book. I also advise you to read it at some point of your life. Actually, very interesting, especially for people studying psychology. So Erikson is famous because he basically coined the term identity we constantly use in psychology nowadays. Identity can be thought as an inner sense of who we are, of what makes us unique, a sense of continuity over time, and a feeling of wholeness, right? So it's quite an abstract concept, actually, but we all understand what does it mean on intuitive level. Erikson believed that the development of personality goes far beyond 18 years of age, as Sigmund Freud supposed, and that we continue to develop as a personality throughout all our lives, including adulthood and old age. So Erikson also believes that each stage of development is a conflict, is a developmental crisis, a turning point in our development where we already cannot live as we used before, and we need to develop something new to overcome this crisis and adapt to new realities of our life. So if you studied Introduction to Psychology or Developmental Psychology course, you, of course, already know about the stages of development according to Erik Erikson. This part of his theory is really well known and studied in other courses. So I won't cover this in much depth, just mentioning this. So this is the most popular part of his series, so we won't stop here much in this video discussing that. What comes to contemporary psychoanalysis? So what happened after? Okay, so Erich Fromm, Karen Horney, Erik Erikson were revising classical psychoanalysis of Sigmund Freud in mid-20th century. But what actually happened after that, and how psychoanalysis continued to develop in the second half of 20th century is a question of contemporary psychoanalysis. For contemporary psychoanalysis, the key figures are Heinz Kohut and Otto Kernberg. Both of them contributed significantly and developed theories which changed psychoanalysis quite strongly. So both of them were born in Austria, and also because of Nazi Germany were forced to immigrate into the United States, but they were very young, so their parents made the decision about immigration. But as you can see, a lot of psychoanalysts and psychologists got to the United States from Germany or Austria because of political events of their time. So contemporary psychoanalysis shares some ideas. So, for example, most of us have a healthy level of self-esteem. We consider ourselves worthwhile, we like ourselves, and we believe that others like us as well. This is a good, normal situation. Self-serving bias refers to a common tendency for people to take credit for success, yet to deny responsibility for failure. Right? It's a common situation in most people. We eagerly take responsibility for anything successful, but we usually deny any responsibility when it comes to failure. Very human-like type behavior, which was called self-serving bias in contemporary psychoanalysis. Narcissism, a very popular topic nowadays, started to be researched in contemporary psychoanalysis many years ago. They are understood it as inflated self-admiration and a constant desire to draw attention to oneself and keep others focused on ourselves. And at the very high end, narcissism can be carried to extremes and become narcissistic personality disorder. So we actually should distinguish narcissism and narcissistic personality disorder, and it's truly not the same. In this course of lectures, we will cover personality disorders, including narcissistic personality disorder, and we actually should distinguish those things. Though for unprepared person, it's really easy to conflate and confuse those concepts. We will slowly and gradually get through. So narcissism, like without personality disorder, is just, too much of self-admiration. Self-admiration is normal tendency, but again, the question is in extent of this self-admiration, right? The one thing is sometimes just to boost yourself a bit, to show off a bit. The other thing is to be focused on that primarily and make all the communication about yourself. It's too much, right? It's too much. The narcissistic paradox, though, that those people show high self-esteem inside, internally, they have a lot of doubts about their own value. So this is a compensatory behavior for internal feeling of insecurity and worthlessness. So according to contemporary psychoanalysts, narcissism is a behavior and communication style is actually compensatory behavior because deeply inside those people not confident enough, they don't value themselves, and they're very vulnerable. And they're trying to overcompensate this with this grandiose type of behavior. And contemporary psychoanalysis try to research the roots of this problem, usually in relationships with parents who could neglect their children, don't satisfy their needs, didn't show love and affection, and those children felt deeply insecure, and after that developed this unproductive communication and behavioral style. So basically, narcissists are actually very vulnerable and sensitive people who just develop very wrong ways of overcoming this in social communication because it brings discomfort and sorrow to other people. Internal representation of self plays an important role in how we interact with our social environment. So deeply, we can see ourselves very different compared to how other people see us, right? And it can be the root of many problems inside social interaction. So one of the theories inside the umbrella of contemporary psychoanalysis is so-called object relations theory, which is based on several assumptions. The internal wishes, desires, and urges of a child are not as important as the development of relationships with significant others, particularly parents. So Freud supposed that internal wishes are the primary factor of your forming of your personality. Object relations theory changes emphasis toward relationships with parents. So the others, or significant others, can become internalized by the child in the form of mental objects. So if I ask you, imagine what your parents would say about anything. You actually can imagine your parents inside your head, and you can basically quite accurately predict their opinion on many matters. Even without asking themselves personally, you have some mental representations of your parents or your grandparents or other people with whom you form the close relationships. So you communicate with them so often and that you internalize their image inside yourself, including their opinion on many matters, and it becomes a part of your mind, which is what's called internalization in object relations theory. So the emotional attachment to those significant others influence our development because we value our relationships with parents, caregivers, and other close people. Unfortunately, sometimes those people can act not in our best interests and be very aggressive, abusive, neglecting, and it cripples people and their personality development. But for us, it's still one of the most impactful factor of our development in childhood. So that led to forming of so-called attachment theory, which you shouldn't conflate with object relations theory, though they have some common themes about relationships. Attachment theory was created by John Bowlby, a British psychologist. One of his famous quotes, "If we value our children, we must cherish their parents." The idea that parents play such a significant role in nurturing children that it's an important factor. He was fourth of the 6 children, and actually his parents didn't spend much time with him. He was raised by a nanny. It was a typical situation for in British privileged families. Parents actually didn't spend almost any time with their children, and children were sent to schools, internet type of schools, without communicating with their parents or only during holidays and vacations. So because of that, Bowlby suffered from emotional coldness of his parents, and maybe because of that, he got interested in studying family and attachments. So studied at boarding school. Initially, he studied medicine because his father was a surgeon and Bowlby wanted to please his father. So, but he became a psychoanalyst at the age of 30, and his supervisor was Melanie Klein. Melanie Klein was very famous psychoanalyst as well, so he got cutting edge level of supervision. He got married at the age of 31, he had 4 children, quite a big family. During World War II, served in British Army as a psychiatrist. And an interesting fact, a mountain in Kyrgyzstan in Central Asia is called Bowlby, in the honor of Bowlby. Unusual fact. So Bowlby focused on the attachment relationships with the mother. So here it's mother because we're speaking about first half and the middle of 20th century, and back then, because of gender stereotypes and patriarchy, mothers were only people who would raise children. Nowadays, it can, instead of mother, actually it could be any type of caregiver with whom baby forms a close emotional bond. So Bowlby understood that those relationships are crucial in terms of meeting of infant protection, nurturance, and support. And Bowlby started to study what happens if the attachment with this primary caregiver, mother, for example, is broken. So what happens if mother leaves her baby for a short period of time, for example, 10, 15, 30, 40 minutes or whatsoever? He noticed that infants actually react on this situation differently. Some seems to trust that mother, of course, she will return, and they basically stay more calm, but they're very happy when the mother returns. Other infants actually react very negatively on the fact of separation, and they become agitated and distressed when mother leaves. So they experience what Bowlby later called separation anxiety. They're not sure in the relationship with their mother. They don't feel that this bond is strong enough. They're afraid that mother will not return. Again, we're speaking about babies, so they don't have any rational cognitive estimation of this situation. So Bowlby also observed a third type of infants who seem to become depressed when the mother leaves. They're very sad. But when the mother returns, they stay detached or even angry at their mother. So his experiments on that led to the describing and exploring different styles of attachment. He called them secure attachment. These children endure separation with minimal anxiety. They felt safe, could explore the room, for example, wait until the mother will come, could approach other adults without fear. And when the mother returned, they were glad to see their mother and interacted for a while. Avoidantly attached group of children, avoidant attachment style, actually avoided the mothers when they returned, probably because of hard feelings they had because of this separation. So this is an interesting reaction, right? So about attachment style. And ambivalent attachment style and ambivalently attached group, those infants were very anxious when the mothers were leaving. So started crying, protesting, actually had different hard time to get calm. And when the mother returns, they actually also were kind of glad, but also irritated at the same time because their mother forced them to feel all those negative feelings. So that's why they had ambivalent reaction. So they both showed like anger, how could you leave me? Why you did this to me? Type of reaction, and the desire are to be close to their mother. Please don't leave me again. So Bowlby actually came to the conclusion that those styles of attachment we develop in our infancy, even before 1 year old, actually influence all our life and how we build relationships in adulthood and our romantic relationships. And actually, later studies show that, yes, it's a significant factor of how you will build romantic relationships in your later life. And also a very important notion for parents, right? So probably the daycare situation before 1.5 years old can actually affect attachment style of your children, and probably it's better to avoid, if possible, leaving children in daycare in such an early age because it negatively affects their attachment style. So these early experiments and reactions of infants on their parents became what Bowlby called working models for later adult relationships. Working models are internalized very deeply on unconscious level and manifest themselves as expectations about relationships with other people. Individual differences in attachment styles may have implications beyond those relationships, so they actually influence your relationships in adulthood. And the last part of this video is neo-analytic movement as the most current theory, which we will discuss, presenting the branch of psychoanalytical psychodynamic theories within interpsychic domain. So one of the prominent figures in neo-analytical movement is Drew Western. In 1998, he defined contemporary psychoanalysis as being based on following 5 ideas. The first idea is that unconscious plays a large role in your life, and it might be not that significant as Freud supposed, but still important. The second idea is that behavior often reflects compromises in conflicts among mental processes, such as emotions, motivations, and thoughts. So you might experience different internal conflicts, and your behavior is kind of a compromising vector of all those forces. The third one, childhood and childhood experiences play an important part in personality development, particularly in terms of shaping adult relationship styles. So it's very also psychodynamic type of idea. Many other theories actually suppose that childhood experience not that important for your development as neo-analytical movement and contemporary psychoanalysis supposes. The fourth one, mental representations of self and relationships guide our interactions with others. So those mental representations of other people constantly affect our interaction with real people, but we're not always self-aware about how it works because many of those influences are happen on unconscious level. And personality development involves not just regulating sexual or aggressive feelings, like Freud supposed, but also moving from immature, socially dependent way of relating to others to mature, independent relationship style, which develops throughout the lifespan. And another important figure in neo-analytic movement is Elizabeth Loftus. And you probably heard her name when you studied the topic of memory in Introduction to Psychology or courses in cognitive psychology. Because Loftus is very famous of her studies on false memories. So it's quite an interesting problem. Loftus and her colleagues pointed to specific techniques in psychotherapy that can contribute to the creation of false memories. So false memory, it's a phenomenon where you think that you remember something and it happened to you, but it actually never happened in your life, but you still completely convinced that it was. It's called a false memory. But actually, it's quite a huge problem, right? Because what if people accuse someone guilty in the court, but it's based on the false memories, witnesses, for example, right? It has long-lasting implications, or like how we live with those false memories, right? So she found that certain usage of hypnosis, suggestive interviewing, and interpretation of symptoms from the side of psychoanalysts can actually lead to the forming of the false memories. So this creates a situation where psychoanalysts unintentionally puts pressure on their clients and interpret everything only in terms of psychoanalysis, and people trying to unconsciously trying to please their psychoanalysts, develop those false memories, which creates a lot of problems. In laboratory studies, Loftus and her colleagues have shown that having individuals imagining various events can lead them to later rate those events as more familiar, leading subjects to have a more elaborate memory representation, which in turn leads them to rate those imagined events as likely to have happened. So it's a sequence of several cognitive processes, but the result is the forming of those false memories, which is actually fascinating. So this effect is called the so-called imagination inflation effect, and occurs when a memory is elaborated upon through imagination, leading the person to confuse the imagined event with the events that actually happened. So unfortunately, it happens, called imagination inflation effect. So we can term these two different views on the unconscious, the motivated unconscious view and cognitive view on unconscious. So modern psychologists usually use so-called cognitive unconscious view. So what's the difference? Freud supposed that unconscious is a source of motivation which affects all your life. It's motivated unconscious. Modern research shows that probably we should perceive unconscious more as a cognitive, like huge chunk of our cognitive processes, including thinking, memory, and perception, just have significant unconscious component. And that's actually how unconscious works. It's mainly about cognitive work, probably not motivation. So those with the cognitive unconscious view readily acknowledge that information can get into our memories without our awareness about those information, or they can explore, for example, subliminal perception. When we perceive something without being aware that we're perceiving something, but we have a physiological response without conscious responses, so-called phenomenon of subliminal perception. Subliminal information primes associated material in memory. So priming makes associated memory more accessible to conscious awareness than is material that is not primed. Results such as this using subliminal primes clearly demonstrates that information can get into the mind and have some influence without going through conscious experience. So a lot of research into cognitive psychology shows, for example, research on priming mentioned like 1 second before, shows that it's an important source of influence, but it's not the same way of understanding unconscious as, for example, initially Sigmund Freud proposed. So the vast majority of research on subliminal perception suggests that unconscious information does not influence people's motivation. So it's more typical for understanding of unconscious in modern psychology. In next videos, we will discuss other theories from intrapsychic domain, because psychodynamic theories not only type of theories which try to research what happens inside our mind and how it affects our personality. So in next videos, we will discuss different theories of motivation and personality, including humanistic psychology. Thank you.